Welcome back to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Now, in part 31, we uncovered the hidden rules of borderline diagnoses. But today we are diving straight into the source material of section IB18 of the ICD-10 CM official guidelines to completely shatter a massive industry myth about unspecified codes. Our mission for this explainer is simple. Reveal exactly when coding unspecified is actually the highest form of compliance. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so let's tackle this incredibly stressful question right out of the gate. If you've spent literally any time in coding schools or had to deal with over-aggressive auditors, you've definitely had this drilled into your head every single day. You hear things like unspecified codes are bad, or they're a sign of lazy coding, or they'll automatically get your claims denied. But is that actually true according to the official rulebook? Well, let's look at the facts. There is a massive gap here between what commercial payers want you to believe and what the official guidelines actually mandate. The industry myth says unspecified codes mean poor coding and sheer laziness. You picture a coder just sweating over a chart, desperately trying to guess a specific anatomical site just to get a claim paid. But the CMS reality? The truth is, an unspecified code is often the absolute most accurate reflection of the limited clinical data available at that exact point in time. Decoding section IB118, the ultimate authority. We absolutely must rely entirely on the CMS guidelines here because this official source strictly overrides any textbook or commercial auditor's opinion out there. The CMS explicitly validates the necessity of these codes right here in black and white. They state directly that sign, symptom, and unspecified codes have acceptable, even necessary uses. And honestly, it makes perfect sense, right? A healthcare provider simply cannot know everything during a brief emergency visit or a quick initial consultation. Medicine is a process of discovery, and your coding must reflect exactly where the provider is in that process. So if the doctor doesn't specify which quadrant of the abdomen is hurting, or say which specific branch of an artery is blocked because the diagnostic workup just isn't complete yet, you absolutely cannot make it up. Seriously, stop guessing. The guidelines explicitly warn that it is completely inappropriate to select a specific code that isn't fully supported by the medical record documentation. Guessing those details just to avoid a payer rejection is a massive compliance violation. You really have to protect your license by refusing to do it. When symptoms are your best friend. Let's move into this next section to see how this builds into our next major tactical application. According to the guidelines, a symptom code is appropriately reported when a related definitive diagnosis has not been established or confirmed by the provider by the end of the encounter. We're talking about your R codes from Chapter 18 here. These are completely acceptable and they are fully compliant when the provider is literally still trying to figure out what's wrong with the patient. Now, by contrast, an unspecified code is mandated when the overall condition actually is determined, something like pneumonia, for example, but the sufficient clinical information isn't known or available to assign a more specific code, like the exact bacterial organism causing it. If that specific detail is completely unavailable to the provider at the time of the encounter, using the unspecified code isn't just allowed, it's strictly required. Let's map this out to a brief emergency visit workflow to see how it plays out in the real world. Imagine a patient presents with severe vertigo. They go through a battery of blood tests and scans, and then they leave the clinic with the final diagnosis still written as just vertigo, because those definitive test results aren't back yet. In that scenario, that Chapter 18 R code should light up proudly on your billing sheet. It is perfectly legitimate and represents the highest level of diagnostic certainty available for that specific visit. The audit defense system. Now that we know the absolute law, it's time to arm you with an impenetrable shield against those aggressive edits. We all know insurance companies routinely deny unspecified codes to artificially lower payouts or just force administrative rework. But you can use this tactical checklist to vaporize their rejection shields. First, stand your ground using the exact text of Section IB18. Prove that your claim perfectly matches the exact boundaries of the legal medical record. Remind those auditors that inventing clinical details is non-compliant. Cite the fact that unspecified codes are mandated for unknown data. And finally, confidently reject any administrative rework driven purely by financial payer edits rather than clinical reality. Because the core truth from CMS is verbatim this. Unspecified codes should be reported when they are the codes that most accurately reflect what is known about the patient's condition at the time of that particular encounter. So again, coding unspecified is infinitely more compliant than inventing details that aren't fully supported by the documentation. conquering Section IB and looking ahead. With this massive industry myth completely dismantled, I'm thrilled to announce a major milestone for this series. We have officially conquered all of Section IB, the General Coding Guidelines.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Will you let pair edits force you into non-compliant guessing, or will you use Section IB18 to confidently code the truth? As I remind you to subscribe, hit that like button and share this explainer with your entire coding network. Really think about that question. And get ready for Part 33, where we move into Section IC, the chapter-specific coding guidelines, starting with Chapter 1, so we can master the high-stakes sequencing laws for systemic infections like sepsis and septic shock. I will see you there.